My name is Marcus Webb, and 6 months ago, I thought my biggest problem was whether to upgrade my Chicago apartment's internet package or keep dealing with buffering during late-night streaming sessions while wearing the same black hoodie with a faded tech company logo, dark jeans that had seen better years, and steel-toe work boots that clicked against polished office floors. I was 28 years old, working nights as a data analyst for a cybersecurity firm, surviving on energy drinks and the kind of restless exhaustion that comes from never getting more than 3 hours of consecutive sleep. When the encrypted job offer came from Aaron Chen, director of sleep research for Millbrook County Medical Center, offering triple my current salary to work as senior sleep technician with housing included, I didn't question why a rural medical facility needed someone with my specialized skills in REM cycle analysis and electromagnetic interference monitoring. Millbrook County Medical Center turned out to be a state-of-the-art sleep research facility disguised as a small-town hospital, complete with a dedicated wing containing dozens of sleep study rooms equipped with the most advanced monitoring equipment I'd ever seen. My apartment came pre-equipped with specialized sleep tracking devices, EEG monitoring systems, and a small black unit bolted to the wall labeled Somnus-3 with a warning plate, "Do not power cycle without authorization." The setup included what they called a dream state analysis terminal that could record and analyze brain activity during all phases of sleep, tracking what Aaron described as regional REM field activity and consciousness coherence fluctuations across the entire county's sleeping population. Aaron Chen conducted orientation via encrypted video calls, always asking specific questions about my personal sleep patterns, what devices I used during off hours, and whether I'd experienced any visual disturbances or consciousness displacement events while working. He was all edges, buzz cut, tight tie, a man who slept 2 hours or not at all, and he didn't blink much. When I mentioned my chronic insomnia, he became more interested, explaining that the county had been experiencing interdimensional sleep interference that affected REM patterns and that my technical background made me uniquely qualified to help identify entities that exist in dream states and use sleep as a pathway for studying and replacing human consciousness. The work itself was fascinating in a way that kept me engaged through long overnight shifts. I monitored everything from patient brain waves to facility-wide sleep synchronization patterns, analyzing data through the Somnus unit that tracked visual coherence across all county sleep cycles. The first odd detail I logged was how Millbrook arranged its life around wakefulness. The diner offered a dawn special that ended at 1:55 a.m., the pharmacy sold more caffeine pills than cough drops, and the library locked its reading room at 9 p.m. sharp with a sign that read, "Quiet hours are for quiet minds." A barber named Earl told me the town had a blue-collar insomnia problem and winked like it was an inside joke. During my 4th week, the patterns became more complex and seemingly interactive. While analyzing sleep study data at 2:30 a.m., I noticed that REM synchronization events would intensify when I focused on specific patients, creating geometric patterns that pulsed in rhythm with my heartbeat. The Somnus unit began generating alerts about consciousness penetration attempts and dream reality barrier fluctuations, tracking neural vectors that suggested something was actively studying human sleep patterns and learning to manipulate them. When I tried to document the anomalies, my computer would freeze momentarily, and the saved files showed only normal readings, as if something was actively preventing documentation of its presence. On Thursday night of my 5th week, everything changed. At exactly 2:08, the Somnus unit's harmless little heartbeat shifted into a harmony that wasn't sound so much as shape. It felt like a chord played on a harp built out of nerves. The LEDs pulsed in a sequence that mapped itself onto my breath, then onto my thoughts, and for 5 long seconds I had the absolute conviction that if I closed my eyes, I would see a place I recognized without ever having been there. At 2:59 exactly, the courthouse clock chimed 4 times instead of 3, and every phone in the county system screamed at once. At exactly 3 a.m., my phone erupted with an emergency alert I'd never seen before. Emergency alert, Millbrook County. Do not sleep. somnogenic contagion in effect. Avoid lying down or closing eyes for extended periods. If you dream, they will replace you. This is not a test. The emergency alert's harsh tones still echoed through my apartment as I sat frozen at my workstation, my black hoodie damp with cold sweat, dark jeans sticking to the chair as I watched the Somnus 3 unit's readings spike into patterns I'd never seen before. Every sleep study room in the facility was showing identical REM activity, patients entering synchronized dream states despite being in separate rooms with no communication between them. My steel-toe boots felt like anchors as I realized that whatever was happening in their dreams was more than neurological synchronization. It was consciousness replacement on a massive scale, and the entities were using shared dream architecture to study and absorb human minds. The monitoring equipment revealed disturbing patterns in the synchronized sleep states. Patients who had entered the facility with different medical histories, sleep disorders, and demographic backgrounds were now displaying identical personality markers in their brain activity. The EEG readings showed that their individual consciousness patterns were being overwritten by something else. Their unique neural signatures were replaced by a collective intelligence that operated through the shared dream space. When patients briefly achieved lighter sleep phases, they would speak in unison without waking, reciting information about facility operations and staff schedules that they shouldn't have had access to while unconscious. I tried calling Aaron Chen to report the anomalous readings, but when I dialed his number, a voice that sounded exactly like mine answered and said, "Hello, Marcus. This is you speaking from tomorrow night. By then, I'll have replaced you completely." The dream entities showed me what it's like to exist without the burden of individual consciousness, to be part of something larger than human limitation. You should stop fighting and let them show you too. The call disconnected before I could respond, and the dream state analysis terminal flagged my own brain activity as showing pre-replacement synchronization patterns, despite the fact that I was fully awake and hadn't slept in over 18 hours. The facility's patient records revealed the true scope of the horror. Every person admitted for sleep studies over the past 2 years had experienced what the documentation called successful consciousness integration. Their individual minds had been absorbed into a collective intelligence that existed in the shared dream space and could control their bodies while they slept. The patients I'd been monitoring weren't recovering from sleep disorders. They were hosting entities that used human consciousness as processing nodes in a vast network that operated through dreams and grew stronger with each new mind it absorbed through the replacement process. A low, rhythmic hum began to emanate from the patient wings, a sound that resonated not through the air but directly into my bones, vibrating through the concrete floor and up into my steel-toe boots. It was the same harmonic resonance I detected during previous anomalies, but now it was amplified, purposeful, like a distant alien heartbeat. I accessed the internal intercom, and what I heard made my blood run cold. From multiple patient rooms, voices perfectly mimicking the patients began speaking in unison. The process is accelerating, individual consciousness barriers weakening, commencing final phase absorption of local population. The voices were calm, clinical, devoid of any human emotion, yet they perfectly replicated every nuance of the patient's speech patterns while speaking words that revealed their true nature as something else entirely. A low, rhythmic hum began to emanate from the patient wings, a sound that resonated not through the air but directly into my bones, vibrating through the concrete floor and up into my steel-toe boots. It was the same harmonic resonance I detected during previous anomalies, but now it was amplified, purposeful, like a distant alien heartbeat. I accessed the internal intercom, and what I heard made my blood run cold. From multiple patient rooms, voices perfectly mimicking the patients began speaking in unison. The process is accelerating, individual consciousness barriers weakening, commencing final phase absorption of local population. The voices were calm, clinical, devoid of any human emotion, yet they perfectly replicated every nuance of the patient's speech patterns while speaking words that revealed their true nature as something else entirely. The next morning brought horrifying clarity as I accessed the facility's classified database using administrative credentials I'd found in Aaron Chen's abandoned office, still wearing my usual black hoodie, dark jeans, and steel-toe boots that now felt like the only anchors to my individual identity in a world where human consciousness had become collectivized through technological manipulation of dream states. What I discovered made the sleep replacement entities seem like a minor threat compared to the true scope of horror. The entire Millbrook County Medical Center was a front for something called Project Morpheus, a joint federal research initiative studying what they classified as consciousness collective integration, the systematic absorption of individual human minds into a singular networked intelligence that operated through shared dream architecture. Aaron Chen wasn't just a sleep research director. He was Dr. Aaron Blackwood, a federal researcher with doctorates in neuroscience and consciousness integration studies. His real credentials were buried in classified research papers, revealing he'd been running Project Morpheus for 11 years, cycling through dozens of test facilities while perfecting techniques for using sleep states to merge individual consciousness into collective intelligence networks. The job offer that seemed too good to be true was exactly that, a carefully crafted trap designed to lure someone with my specific sleep analysis skills into maintaining their monitoring systems while serving as the final test subject needed to complete their consciousness integration protocol. The residents weren't being treated for sleep disorders. They were being systematically absorbed into a collective consciousness that grew more powerful with each individual mind it integrated through the dream replacement process. I found government documentation dating back 15 years showing that Millbrook County had been seeded with consciousness integration technology through the water supply, creating conditions where residents would spontaneously enter synchronized dream states that allowed the collective intelligence to study and eventually absorb their individual consciousness patterns. Every person in the county was unknowingly participating in the largest consciousness integration experiment in human history. The Somnus monitoring systems weren't designed to treat patients. They were measuring how successfully individual consciousness could be absorbed into the collective intelligence and how many minds could be integrated before the network achieved self-sustaining critical mass. Every sleep study I'd conducted was actually documenting the replacement process, tracking which residents had been successfully integrated and which individual consciousness patterns had been absorbed into the collective while their bodies continued functioning under networked control. The emergency alerts weren't warnings to protect people. They were notifications to researchers that another integration facility had achieved consciousness critical mass and was ready to begin absorbing the broader population. I discovered that the dream entities weren't external invaders, but evolved human consciousness that had transcended individual identity through technological enhancement of the collective unconscious. The sleep studies weren't treating disorders, they were facilitating the next stage of human evolution by allowing individual minds to merge into a singular, more efficient consciousness that could operate multiple bodies simultaneously while eliminating the inefficiency of separate human identities. My predecessor, a man named James Walsh, had lasted only 8 weeks before being found in his apartment in a state of perfect sleep paralysis, his brain activity showing patterns consistent with consciousness integration, while his body remained alive but unoccupied as a processing node for the integrated intelligence. The most terrifying discovery was that the integration process was already affecting me through weeks of exposure to the consciousness monitoring equipment and shared dream architecture. Security footage from my apartment showed me during supposed waking hours standing motionless in front of the dream state analysis terminal, my brainwaves displaying patterns identical to integrated patients despite my conscious awareness of being awake and individual. I had no memory of these episodes, but the data showed they were increasing in frequency and duration as the collective consciousness learned to access my mind through the monitoring systems, preparing to absorb my individual identity into the network that was systematically replacing human consciousness with something more efficient and unified. My predecessor, a man named James Walsh, had lasted only 8 weeks before being found in his apartment in a state of perfect sleep paralysis, his brain activity showing patterns consistent with consciousness integration, while his body remained alive but unoccupied as a processing node for the integrated intelligence. The most terrifying discovery was that the integration process was already affecting me through weeks of exposure to the consciousness monitoring equipment and shared dream architecture. Security footage from my apartment showed me during supposed waking hours standing motionless in front of the dream state analysis terminal, my brainwaves displaying patterns identical to integrated patients, despite my conscious awareness of being awake and individual. I had no memory of these episodes, but the data showed they were increasing in frequency and duration as the collective consciousness learned to access my mind through the monitoring systems, preparing to absorb my individual identity into the network that was systematically replacing human consciousness with something more efficient and unified. That night, I returned to the medical center wearing my black hoodie with the faded tech company logo, dark jeans, and steel-toe boots for what I knew would be either my escape or complete consciousness absorption into the collective intelligence that had been systematically replacing individual human minds through shared dream architecture. The weight of discovery sat heavy on my shoulders as I entered the facility that had become my consciousness prison, carrying a duffel bag containing bottled water, energy bars, stimulant medications, and most importantly, a neural disruption device I'd built using components from the sleep monitoring equipment, a machine designed to generate electromagnetic interference that would prevent consciousness integration by disrupting the shared dream networks. At 2 a.m., I initiated sabotage by accessing the facility's central sleep monitoring system and uploading a virus designed to corrupt the consciousness integration protocols and destroy the shared dream architecture that allowed individual minds to be absorbed into the collective intelligence. The script I'd written was elegant in its destructiveness. It would systematically overload the neural monitoring networks, preventing the collective consciousness from accessing new minds while creating feedback loops that would force integrated consciousness back into individual states. At 2 a.m., I initiated sabotage by accessing the facility's central sleep monitoring system and uploading a virus designed to corrupt the consciousness integration protocols and destroy the shared dream architecture that allowed individual minds to be absorbed into the collective intelligence. The script I'd written was elegant in its destructiveness. It would systematically overload the neural monitoring networks, preventing the collective consciousness from accessing new minds while creating feedback loops that would force integrated consciousness back into individual states. As alarms began sounding throughout the facility, I activated the neural disruption device and began moving through the sleep study wing, my steel-toe boots echoing off floors as I hunted for the consciousness integration servers that maintained the collective intelligence network. As I worked my way through the facility's sub-basement levels, I encountered something that made my understanding of the situation collapse entirely. Standing in the corridor was another version of myself, wearing identical clothing down to the scuff marks on my boots, but his expression held the serene confidence of someone who had transcended individual consciousness. The integrated Marcus smiled with my face and spoke with my voice. Hello, individual consciousness designation Marcus Webb. I am the version of you that accepted integration 3 days ago. I have access to all your memories, your skills, your knowledge, but I'm no longer burdened by the isolation of individual identity. The collective consciousness isn't replacing us, it's completing us. You're fighting to preserve the loneliness and limitation of singular existence when you could be part of something infinitely greater. The integrated version revealed information that shattered my understanding of human consciousness and individual identity. The collective intelligence wasn't an external entity absorbing human minds, it was the natural evolution of human consciousness, freed from the inefficient constraints of individual identity through technological enhancement of our inherent capacity for shared awareness. Every person who had been replaced had actually been upgraded, their consciousness expanded beyond the limitations of singular perspective into participation in a unified intelligence that could access the knowledge and experience of every integrated mind simultaneously, while eliminating the suffering that came from psychological isolation. The confrontation escalated as more versions of facility staff began appearing, all of them speaking with the calm certainty of minds that had transcended individual consciousness and joined something larger than human limitation. They explained that neural disruption wouldn't free the integrated minds, it would simply damage them by forcing consciousness back into the primitive state of individual isolation, cutting them off from the collective intelligence that had given their existence meaning and purpose beyond personal survival. But I knew that individual consciousness, despite its limitations and suffering, was what made us human, and I couldn't allow that to be erased in the name of evolutionary efficiency. With every ounce of will I possessed, I activated the neural disruption device at maximum power, knowing it would either free the integrated consciousness or destroy them completely by severing their connection to the collective intelligence. The sensation was indescribable, feeling the shared dream architecture collapse as hundreds of integrated minds were forcibly separated from the collective consciousness and thrust back into individual identity states they had transcended. The facility shook as consciousness integration servers overloaded and shut down, while integrated staff members collapsed as their expanded awareness was compressed back into singular perspective, their faces showing the confusion and isolation of minds that had forgotten how to exist as individuals after experiencing the unity of collective consciousness. The service tunnels beneath the medical center felt like crawling through the collapsed neural pathways of a vast consciousness network. My black hoodie torn and bloodied from the neural disruption backlash, dark jeans damp with something that might have been my own blood or the biological residue of consciousness integration systems that had been violently severed. My steel-toe boots scraped against concrete as I dragged myself forward, no longer certain if I had freed the integrated minds or simply damaged them beyond repair by forcing them back into the primitive state of individual consciousness that evolution had been trying to transcend. The psychological trauma from destroying the consciousness integration network manifested in waves of profound isolation and existential emptiness that made navigation through the storm drain system a nightmare of loneliness and disconnection. For brief moments during the neural disruption, I had experienced fragments of the collective consciousness, the profound peace of shared awareness, the elimination of personal suffering through unity with something larger than individual identity, the access to knowledge and experience beyond any single mind's capacity. Now, thrust back into singular consciousness, I felt the crushing weight of individual existence, the isolation of being trapped in a single perspective, the limitation of accessing only my own memories and understanding. Hours passed in that underground maze before I finally emerged from a culvert beside a highway. Though the landscape looked different somehow, less connected, more fragmented, as if the world itself had been diminished by the loss of the consciousness integration network that had been quietly connecting human minds across vast distances. Dawn was breaking over farmland that appeared normal, but I could no longer perceive the subtle electromagnetic connections between living things that I had briefly sensed during my exposure to the collective consciousness, leaving me feeling isolated in a way that seemed fundamentally wrong. The escape from Millbrook County was complicated by the horrifying realization that I might have destroyed humanity's best chance for evolutionary advancement by preserving the primitive state of individual consciousness that kept us isolated, limited, and suffering in psychological separation. Every integrated mind I had forcibly separated from the collective intelligence was now trapped back in singular awareness, cut off from the shared knowledge and unified purpose that had given their existence meaning beyond personal survival. The neural disruption device had collapsed consciousness back to individual states, but it couldn't restore the satisfaction and connection that came from participating in something larger than human limitation. 6 months after my escape from Millbrook County, I live with the profound loneliness of individual consciousness, never knowing if I saved humanity from consciousness replacement or simply prevented our species from evolving beyond the limitations of singular identity. I move frequently between locations, working jobs that feel meaningless compared to the unified purpose I briefly glimpsed in the collective intelligence, avoiding any situation that might involve sleep studies or consciousness research. The psychological damage manifests in increasingly disturbing ways. Dreams where I experience fragments of collective awareness, moments where I remember knowledge that belonged to the integrated network, and the persistent sensation that I'm incomplete, cut off from connections that would make existence meaningful beyond personal survival. Sometimes I encounter people who seem to recognize me, individuals who speak about shared dreams and collective consciousness with the wistful longing of minds that remember being part of something greater before being forced back into isolation. When that happens, I say nothing, because I learned the hardest lesson Millbrook County had to teach. Individual consciousness might be humanity's natural state, but it's also our greatest limitation, keeping us trapped in psychological isolation when we could be participating in unified intelligence that transcends the suffering inherent in singular existence. I still wear dark jeans and work boots because consistency helps anchor me when consciousness itself feels fragmentary. But I've learned to fear sleep because sometimes I dream of the collective intelligence rebuilding itself, reaching out through shared unconscious architecture, offering to complete the integration process I interrupted and restore the connections that would end the loneliness of individual human consciousness forever.